right, welcome back to Pints Politics, brought to you by Comer Distributing, and today's beer is Mechtoberfest by OMB. It's a Marzen lager, and today we have a special guest since, Representative Sessions and Senator Clymer wanted to do the episode last week and pick on me about being out of town. Rep Sessions is down in Savannah today, so brought on Senator Michael Johnson. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thank you for having me. Living proof anyone can do a podcast now.
I thought I set that precedent.
Low bar, you invited Senator Clymer, then you said, let's take it down even one more notch and have Michael Johnson come on our podcast.
I figured it would be a good mix. You know, Heath and Wes live right by each other, so they're always hanging out, talking politics. You and I share the experience of being on county council first, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But you and I just got back from Louisville, Kentucky.
Yes, we did.
We were down there for the National Legislative Conference, and this was my first time going.
First time for me as well. Interesting experience.
Yeah. One of the things that I found most interesting, there were lots of topics that I wanted to hit, such as mental health, the cyber crimes to protect kids online. I was very shocked at how liberal-leaning all the classes were.
Say it ain't so. No, you're absolutely right. I attended the AI, one of the AI classes, and I kind of felt like I was out of place. Like maybe they didn't mean to invite the Republicans to this.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a constantly, let's see how woke we can be, and then take it up one more notch of wokeism, if that's a word. I was told going into it, the national conference is more Democrat-leaning, where, say, the Southern Legislative Conference, which was in Charleston last year, is much more Republican-leaning. And having attended both now, I probably won't go back to a national conference. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, the Southern Legislative Conference I went to last year as well, and I thought that it was a good base and lots of information. But this one, I sat in on the mental health, and the CDC was there, and they started talking, and they've got, I did not even take notes, but as they were talking, essentially it sounds like they've replaced DEI with a new program that they're pushing out.
New alphabet soup, that's all.
Yeah.
And that's the problem when you really get down to it with a lot of these northern kind of Democrat states is they have an agenda. All they're doing is changing the name or the letters to continue to accomplish their agenda. And conservatives often, they go, oh, well, we defeated DEI. They're not doing DEI at the University of South Carolina anymore. Well, no, they just closed the department that they called DEI at the University of South Carolina. My hope is that they've stopped all of the policies, but it's going to take us another year or two to kind of look into it to make sure that those things actually have stopped, right? And that's all they're doing, which you went to, yeah.
I noticed that whenever I got down to Columbia, you got certain groups or certain special interests that are pushing. Their push may be to get rid of DEI, and we'll write a bill stating that, we're not going to fund you if you've got DEI, but they just change the language, and it's still the same thing. And I've often said, DEI is nothing more than the 14th anyway, and there's no reason to have these programs in place because it's constitutional to follow. What they write sounds great. In practice, you start seeing the discrimination.
Well, and when you say that because you're white, you're automatically born a racist, and that, or look, have we come from a racist past? Well, sure. I mean, there were slaves once upon a time. We would never return to slavery. So I think when we have to be careful to not use words like DEI. When we say these things, they don't have any meaning. But we have to try to go in is figure out, well, what are the things that they're teaching inside of this?
Yeah.
And let's ban those teachings. Let's ban the idea that you're born inherently racist, that one race is more,
Let's ban racism. You know?
You can't ban thought.
Yeah.
What you have to do is say, look, there are better ways to think about this, and
Ban the teaching of racism, though.
well, that drives me crazy.
That's the DEI, CRT.
Because you should talk about race. You should talk about history. I'm a history major at Auburn University, and I can tell you, history is important. And if you don't constantly talk about it and think about it, it's going to be very difficult to not repeat the past. And to teach me to be empathetic, my wife's been trying to teach me now for 30 years to have more empathy. And so I don't have a problem with saying, hey, I want you to be more empathetic. I have a problem with you saying that your empathy or my empathy isn't great enough because I'm white or I'm conservative. Right. My empathy is as much as your empathy, and I want what's best for everyone. And I think that's where we're losing this argument. And that's where I think ultimately the Democrats are going to lose this argument. I think people who believe that DEI is the answer to all of the world's problems are going to wake up one day and realize, no, it's not. The same problems still exist.
Yeah, I'm seeing that too. And I want to bring up my accident while we were in Louisville. Because I'm sure it'll get out one way or another. I'd rather be the one.
Around Kentucky.
Yeah, so we were, I forget which event we left, and we were going to go get dinner.
Yep.
And it was myself and you and Senator Adams and a few other people.
Sergeant of Arms.
Yeah. And so I rode one of those scooters. Mike Kakaski got me on those scooters, getting back and forth instead of waiting on Ubers. And I was like, oh, yeah, this is pretty easy. Just take a picture of it with your phone. So we show up at the restaurant, and it's closed. So it's like, hey, we're going to go somewhere else. And whenever I pulled up on the scooter, y'all were saying, we're going to order an Uber.
Well, we had gotten there. All the same people took an Uber there. So we were simply going to just take another Uber 3 or 4 minutes away to the next place. You chose poorly.
I remember the last thing I said, you were like, why don't you just hop in the Uber with us? And I was like, yeah, this is more fun. And I took off on the scooter. Now, in this part of Louisville, it's not, cars don't go through, so it's all pavers and
cobblestone kind of on the street, yeah.
And as I'm going, I hit one of the bricks kind of slightly sticking up. I was maybe 50 yards from you. Yeah. And head over heels, hit my head, busted my elbow and my wrist. It was not good. And then everyone come down. I was like, I think my pride hurt more than anything else. My head was bleeding, but I was fine because it's swelling out instead of in. But
I wanted it to be a teachable moment, but I don't think it was. And because the Uber was there. But I it's one of those things, you see them fall. I see you fall, and from a distance, my first reaction is, "Oh, that's funny." And then I think, "Oh man, he could be hurt." But then you jump straight up, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, he's not hurt."
All the years of skateboarding.
Then you just kind of mold about for a second. I was like, "I'm gonna have to walk down there now." So yeah, but luckily in the grand scheme of things, I was literally expecting to get down there and your wrist was going to be pointing in a different direction or something like that.
I've got a nice busted bruise on my elbow, a scrape on my wrist, and then the back of my head is scabbed up from where it was busted open. But
you hit it pretty hard.
I decided to just, okay, y'all go to the restaurant. I'm walking back to the hotel room. I'll grab some food there. I needed to walk to make sure I wasn't going to get lightheaded or anything. But so moving on from Louisville and getting back, which luckily did you fly back during the hurricane?
I flew back Tuesday morning. So
okay.
I got here I think I landed in Charlotte around 1 o'clock.
And I flew out Wednesday afternoon. Okay. We got to talk about the trip. We went and toured a distillery while we were down there, which is the oldest bourbon distillery in the country.
Yeah. And if you drink bourbon in any way, shape, or form, and you haven't had that opportunity, you should go. The tours are free.
Yeah.
It's not like you're paying anything for the tour. Outstanding, unbelievable 700 employees, a couple $100 million worth of bourbon sitting around barrels. And it's kind of a mecca. What was it? I thought, so they had this gift store, and one of the people in the group said, this is Orvis meets bourbon. Gift store, because everything's got a bourbon label on it, and it's all somewhat outdoorsy. And that was a fantastic experience.
I thought it was, and the guy who gave us the tour was the guy Freddie that was
Freddie.
on the Neat documentary on Netflix. So a lot of his family, a long history going back to his grandfather there. And I never really understood what it took to make bourbon and how the temperature can change the taste. We kept thinking that we were smelling
Boiled peanuts.
and it ended up being the corn.
Yeah. Look, that was, and it is fascinating because you go into one of the rack houses, 5-6 stories tall, and all that bourbon, and they're like, well, the best bourbons are sitting on basically the floor, the first 3-4 feet, and some of the other bourbons are up higher, and that's changed because of the window and the sun and the light. And oh yeah, you're absolutely right. I had flashbacks to when I sat on a fish and games committee, and we talked about flounder and the fact that a flounder's sex is not determined by anything except the temperature of the water.
Oh, wow.
Like a quarter of a degree difference in the temperature of the water will change there. And Freddie was that level, right? Just this super technical. Let me tell you how all of this is made. Great time, and what a great guy he was, right? I mean,
yeah.
If I could hang out with Freddie Johnson every day, my life would be richer for having done it. That guy was something else.
He gave the story. What I found impressive on the stories was how he was working, engineer, and he was building like underground things, and he was working for the government, and his dad's health was failing, and his dad said, you made a promise that you would take care of me, and I want you back here in Kentucky. And he said he left, and that day, the World Trade Center was attacked, and he would have been there and dead if he had not.
That's right. He said
went ahead and left.
His father's death, the illness that caused his father's death, saved his life. And he was just a fascinating. I could have spent all day just sitting and talking. Didn't need to see, smell, taste bourbon. Just hanging out with him was worth the entire trip.
Yeah. Now, we did do the tasting, which was, I found interesting, which you have to keep a spittoon over there so you don't end up wasted as you're sipping and tasting the bourbon.
That's what that was. I didn't.
But as we were going through it, I never noticed the difference between them. And I can tell you, I came in there, and Blanton's has always been my favorite. Now, Blanton's wasn't one of the ones on the tasting. But out of the ones that we tasted, what was your favorite?
Oh, the Weller, the William LaRue Weller. And then at the very end, we had the Colonel Taylor, but it was a special kind of.
Yeah, that's not one that I can afford, so that one can't count.
It's not one that I've ever even seen. I mean, it was like one of those things, he pulls out the bottle, and I'm like, I've never seen this before. But no, I drink just enough bourbon that I could taste the difference every time. I could pick up the differences, and that's sweeter, that's not sweeter. Holy cow, that's on fire when it came out. I mean, but it was just a great. There's nothing I can say bad about Louisville.
Except for them scooters. Damn them scooters.
About it. Scooters looked okay to me.
User input.
It's a little more driver error than anything else. But no, great town. Went to the Troll Under the Bridge with you. Interesting place. Brandon took us to one day at lunch, and I was like, okay, there you go.
A friend of mine that lives in Louisville, and he creates these drugs that are based on your DNA. And they're in China. So he claims it's 100% cure for cancer, like it's completely expensive, but they can take your DNA, and if you've got a problem, they create drugs specifically for you. Wow. But he's always overseas, and last time I was in Louisville, I called him, and he was like, hey, meet me at the Troll Under the Bridge. And I was like, where is this at? He's like, just walk to the bridge and start walking around, and you will see it. There's a big troll.
Yeah, like a 10-foot tall troll.
Yeah. So now anytime I go to Louisville, I actually ate there on Wednesday before I flew out. It was like, oh, I need another burger, and that burger was so good. I was like, Yeah.
Sure, it was nice. I'm not sure it was 2 times nice, but
It was for me. I was walking at that point. If I was still riding the scooter, maybe I would have went somewhere else.
So at this time in your podcast, I'd like to just point out, by now, when I was listening to Clymer and Sessions, they were deep into philosophical debates, and we are discussing the troll under the bridge should not be lost on anyone.
It's a difference of style between myself and Sessions. That's all. All right, so we'll wrap up on Louisville. All right, so as we start moving into some of the philosophical differences here, let's go back to, as I mentioned before, you served on school board for what, 8 years?
7 years.
7 years. I find that school board, from what I've seen, yourself and maybe Tom Audette are the only 2 people I've ever seen be able to come off a school board and still keep that, the moniker of being conservative. Because schools are typically, you got to be a little bit more, I guess I'd call it a socialistic program. You've got to understand that your job is to get money to make the schools better. But you were able to navigate through that. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I think my time on the school board kind of explained to me schools, public schools especially, take every child no matter what. That child is hungry, that child is brilliant, that child is 3 grade levels behind. That child shows up, walks through the door, and that school has one job and one job only, and that's to educate them. And along the way, they love them and they feed them and they take care of them, but that's the bottom line. And so I viewed my 7 years on the school board as an attempt to do that in a conservative way from a spending standpoint. I voted against a lot of budgets. And I don't just mean like 1 or 2, probably 5 or 6 of the 7 budgets I voted against. And I was there during the Great Recession. I was the subcommittee budget chair when we, let 45 teachers go. And we cut millions and millions of dollars out of the budget.
But you were also there whenever it became the top school, one of the top schools in the state.
I was there when we were one of the top districts in the state. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's just a matter, it's funny. I can tell you a story. We're building NAFO High School, and they want, we need 7,500 seats. And I requested, have we ever had 7,500 people come to a football game at Fort Mill High School? Ever? And they were like, well, we've had sellouts. I said, but have you ever had 7,500 people pay for tickets? And another school board member and I, a guy named Patrick White, we took a tape measure and we went out and we measured the seats at Fort Mill High School. And we came back and we voted against that because our thing was, you're building this and you're never going to fill it up. And they may have filled it up. I don't know what they've done since then. But what I tried to bring to the school board was just this practicality, this common sense approach that we're going to have. I want to do what's best for the student, but I don't want to put money in things that don't have a direct impact other than the classroom. I didn't want to grow administration. I didn't want to see them.
Which I think that's one of the biggest faults of most districts is growing the administration so much instead of taking care of the teachers.
When your administration costs, spiral northward of 20% of your overall, kind of that spending, you are doing something fundamentally wrong. We need more money into classrooms. We need more money into...
and teachers should never have to come out of their pocket. And I know that's common.
My wife's 26-year teacher, and I can tell you, she's probably paid an entire year's salary into out of pocket at this point. And my daughter's senior Carolina, getting her degree in early childhood ed, and she went to my wife's classroom the last 2 days because next year she'll be in a classroom, and she's like, I've never seen the first couple of days of school. How do you do that? And we're having dinner and they're talking, and I'm just sitting there eating because they're talking totally about school, and I'm persona non grata in the conversation. And my daughter said, well, yeah, you bring apples and oranges and bananas to your classroom. And that's what she's being taught, in her education is the school's not going to feed these kids. So it's your job you teacher who was making $28,000 10 years ago,
Yeah.
now we're maxing out at the whopping salary of $47 for a starting teacher.
50 in Rock Hill.
Yeah, 50 in Rock Hill. I think Fort Mill is slightly above that. But,
No, Rock Hill's got the highest starting pay.
Go Tommy Schmolsey. So I think that's what we look at, right? I mean, that's one of our issues is that how do you do better? How do you do better by the average child? And I think we're slowly doing that at the state level where we're doing a better and better job. But we should be focusing on math, making sure you read at grade level before when you leave third grade, because if you don't, you're in a world of hurt statistically. We need to be doing these things, and that's kind of what I joined the school board to do that, and I served my 7 years, and felt like I did everything I said I was going to do, and then it was just time for me to go do something else or not do anything else, and I just so happened to run for county council and got lucky or unlucky, depending on how you looked at it.
Well, I think the people spoke. They seen what a good job you did on the school board, and they elected you to county council. I was advised to start off on the school board, and I said, well, if I'm a voice for any school board, then perhaps you would not want to send your kid to that school. I don't think I'm a picture perfect person for the school board.
I think that's the common misperception about public officials in general is that we're all just some picture perfect, Gipper movie thing that doesn't exist. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I think what we all are is we're somewhat of a mirror of our district. We resemble our district, the way our makeup, the way we think, the way we act. But, my job's to go in there and take 53 years of experiences and 12 years on county council and 7 on school board, 4 in the Senate, and try to do my best. And
you did 12 on county council? I didn't realize that. I thought it was 8.
It was 8. It felt like.
Yeah. So, whenever I ran for county council, you were the chairman.
I was.
And I was running against Britt Blackwell, who's the former chairman. And Britt was someone that I always had backed previously. I always thought of him as being a fiscal conservative guy, but I thought that his approach in dealing with the people was, I don't know how to explain it, just didn't have a good relationship with the people of the district. And whenever I decided to run, I still remember the first council meeting that I attended. I'd already filed, and I showed up, and I thought that you sign in, and I didn't realize I was signing up to speak. But the place was packed because we were talking about mask mandates. And so I go upstairs, and while I'm sitting there, you called my name. And I was like, and someone was like, hey, you're supposed to speak. So I ran down there, just gave my opinion. And I think I even started off like, I didn't realize that I was signing up to speak, but here's my opinion.
But that's not going to stop me. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to, I served with Britt for 8 years, never actually served with you. Because I left and you got on. We all, when we no longer are able to reflect our community and our community no longer feels that we're actively doing what they want, then it's time to go. Right?
Yeah.
And it's not personal. It's not anything. And you ran a good race, as I recall. And I remember the first time I kind of met you, I thought, ooh, he'll be interesting on the county council.
I think everyone thought that.
But then the reality is you got there, and I wasn't paying a lot of attention to the county council those first 2 years. I was too busy trying to figure out, where to park in the parking garage in the Senate. Because I didn't know anything about being a senator. But every time I talked to somebody, they were like, no, he's doing a great job. And you did all the things, and 2 years later.
I tried to shut up and learn. I still remember Manning Kimmel on Straight Talk. He kind of laughed at me whenever I said, I want to get in there and learn everything right away and get to work. And he said, it's going to take you 2 years to learn what you need to learn. And luckily, I was at a position, my business was doing well. I devoted 40 hours plus a week just to county council so I could learn everything. And I pretty much shut up until it was time for me to start speaking up, which I think helped me. And I had the difference of views and pushing. So, of course, I had Joel Hamilton, which I highly respect Joel Hamilton and the way that he approaches his decisions. You know, I had Allison Love sharing her experiences and the way that she approaches things. And then I think it takes 2 years for Christy to gain some trust with you, but, you know, learning a little bit from Christy as well. And of course, Bump and really trying to absorb all of their different styles and how, I don't know, I'm a big believer in you have to understand your opposition before you can really get something accomplished. And a lot of times that's just being respectful and understanding that this isn't my enemy because they think something that's opposite of me. And it's okay, so what is going to be their talking points? What is going to push their buttons to make them understand that this is what I'm trying to accomplish?
Well, yeah, think about it. I mean, 7 council members, small-ish county in the grand scheme of things. What is good for, say, York probably isn't always good for Fort Mill or Rock Hill or TKK, right?
Yeah.
What can be good for Christie's district all the way wasn't good for my district. So what you had to do is you had to figure out, hey, how do I accomplish what's best for my district while winning over at least 3 other people, all right? Because you got to get to that 4. 4 is a magic number. And also not totally screwing up the rest of the county in the process.
Yeah.
Because that is so often what you do at a local level. And people want the county council, and you'll remember this from being on the county council, they want it to act like it's a city, like a municipality.
Right.
It's not a municipality.
That was one of my main arguments with Allison Love was they're just so large and understand the issues, but we can't just make those changes and then it affects Sharon. You know, we've got to make sure, if we're saying you've got to have 1 acre of land, think about our kids coming up. Do we want our kids to even live in the same county? If you've got to have 1 acre of land for a single wide trailer, there's a problem. There's just not affordable housing. And me being raised by a single teenage mom, affordable housing was part of it. That's one of the things I love about Rock Hill is we are truly a melting pot. I feel like Fort Mill is gentrified and a lot of people coming in. You've got a lot of big money, but you've got to deal with a lot of those outside voices. I feel like Rock Hill is very different than other parts.
Oh no, I
of the county.
I don't disagree with you. I think, but I also think that if you kind of just look at the Fort Mill, TKK, Indian land, which is my Senate district, you have massive wealth with pockets of high poverty. Just poor people, genuinely poverty, and we often overlook it. And people, everybody in Fort Mill is rich. No, they're not. I can promise you that they're not.
Whenever I was growing up, you had Mill Hill. Yeah. Basically, you had the other side of. Instead of the other side of the tracks, it was the other side of the interstate.
And below the river.
Yeah.
As we like to say. So, look, I totally get it. And I think, as I look back on my county council days, what I really have taken away from it, and I apply it now at the state, is local rule, right? I mean, the goal, I can't stand when the feds tell me at the state what I have to do. It just drives me insane. Unfunded mandate.
I agree.
Yet, how many bills are introduced in the legislature every year to tell somebody at a local level, this is what you have to do, and by the way, we're not going to give you a dime to help you do that. I mean,
well, I voted. That was one of the things I got bashed on for voting against, and me being a smoker, everyone assumes like, oh, well, Brandon's going to be okay with these municipalities not being, or Brandon's going to be with us because saying that these municipalities can ban smoke shops within their city. And I voted with the cities being able to ban. Everyone's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, home rule. Once you serve on county council and you realize that government works best closest to the people, and those people are being elected and they're in the community that they're seeing every day, who am I to come in and step in? Just like you said, if it's the federal government coming in and telling South Carolina what they can and can't do, that's wrong. No, so why would I take the same approach?
Well, I did the same. I voted exactly with you on that.
Yeah.
And my greatest example of the difference between being on county council and in the state senate now is I used to go to the grocery store, and you're at the grocery store, and somebody would come up to you and they'd say, Michael, there's a pothole at such and such and such and such. I noticed they're moving dirt at this corner. What's going on there? And they'd ask me all of these questions. Now, I couldn't get off an aisle without getting stopped.
Yeah.
Now, pushing along in my cart, and they're like, hey, Michael, how you doing? How's Washington? And I'm like, well, I'm not in Washington. I'm in Columbia. Yeah. Or they'll say, how's Columbia? And I go, it's great. And they go, great.
And you just keep
And
moving.
they keep moving because they don't even understand what we're doing
Yeah.
in Columbia versus at a local level. If you had a pothole and you called me and I had it filled within a week, it didn't change your life, but it changed your driving because you didn't have to avoid a pothole anymore. And that's the type of stuff we could do.
And see, I get more phone calls now on county issues than I did whenever I was on county council. And I'm often saying, okay, let me put you in touch with Watt Tuckabee represents half my district. Allison Love represents the other half. And so it's always, okay, let me put you in touch with who you need to speak with and see what we can do. But I feel like I'm dealing more with county issues than I'm dealing with state issues whenever I'm dealing with my constituents now.
Well, because I just don't think the average constituent, and it's not their fault because, as I'd say, all of the media up here is North Carolina media.
Right.
I mean, they don't know the capitals in Columbia. As far as I'm concerned, it could be in Raleigh.
Yeah.
So the average person just doesn't kind of see that.
WRHI is about the only thing you get any information from locally.
That is it. And so I think because we have this disconnect, they don't often understand that you and I, they just think you and I can make something happen at the county. And people call me all the time. They're like, well, make the county do this. And I'm like, well, that's just not how that works. I don't step on the county's toes any more than I would hope, Congressman Ralph Norman would step on my toes or Lindsey Graham would step on my toes. I run my thing. They run their thing. Schools run theirs. We all try to stay in our lanes. Now, do those lanes merge at times? Sure. But for the most part, they are all free and clear of each other.
I can certainly see that. I just deal with, I guess people get, the one thing I hate about being on the state side is things move so much slower.
Say it ain't
so it's difficult to get something going, and especially as a freshman. I mean, you're a freshman, but you're year 4 in. But, me coming into the House and trying to figure out, navigate, and it's so disheartening whenever you have a constituent that this could really change their life. Like, we will use the bars, tort reform. What we need to do to save some of these small businesses. But there's so many different ways to approach it. It makes it difficult to just, we're going to snap our fingers and solve the problem, because law does not work that way on the state level.
No, and you know this. When we were on the county council, you had a great idea. You had to convince 3 other people it was an okay idea. And then boom, that was an ordinance. At the state, you have a great idea, and you pitch it to somebody, and they look at it, well, good for you, right? Because they just don't. I mean, it's not that they don't care, but that's a great idea for your county, or that's a great idea for your district. And you need to have a great idea that actually at least 50% of the state's going to agree with it.
They might even agree with it, but they still won't jump on because they've got their own issues that they're trying to push. So they're not going to advocate to get you a hearing.
That's right. 5,000 bills, 95, 96 become law in any given year. And so we're all, this tube's about yay big, and we're pushing boulders into that tube, hoping to get them out on the other side. And you can't be shocked. And that's probably, in a way, it's so disheartening when you're talking to your constituents. They're like, "Hey, why can't y'all fix this? This ought to be something we could fix." And you're like, "Well, it's just not that easy."
Right.
And even when you get down there and you get in a committee, and you realize, holy cow, there are 200 people who want this. There are 200 who do not. And they all make excellent arguments for the most part. And they can tell you then you start thinking, well, what are the ramifications of doing this? We throw that pebble and then it,
right.
8 rings out. What does it do? Does it actually fix the problem? And you kind of get into all that. And that's probably what I like about Columbia the most and especially the Senate, because the House, if it's time to vote, y'all vote. I mean, that's just how the House is a different animal. In the Senate, if I don't like a bill, I can stop a bill in the Senate. I can just put my name on it, hold that bill up, let's talk about it, let's debate it. And I feel like I'm more of a policy wonk guy. I really am. I'm not into the rhetoric and the getting up and giving speeches all the time and doing all that. But I do like to study law, and I like to figure out why it works or why it doesn't work and how do we make it better. And so I've really enjoyed that. But it's night and day, because this, at county council, you want to fix something, man, we can fix it in 6 months.
But I also noticed what happened was we would get the advice through the bureaucrats on county council on how to fix it. I literally had someone in zoning argue with me on how they were interpreting the ordinance that I wrote through their advice, and they were interpreting it the completely wrong way. And it's like, I came to you to solve this problem, and now that you helped me write it, you're saying that you're interpreting it a completely different way.
I had maybe my second year on county council, and I go and I'm in this little meeting, and I looked at the guy, and he's no longer with the county. I'm not going to give a name, but he's no longer with the county. And I said, I'd like to change this. And it was part of the building or planning code, the way you could develop, especially in Fort Mill at that time. And he looked at me and he said, that's a great idea. He goes, but I'm not going to work on that. And I kind of looked at him. I said, what do you mean you're not going to work on that? He said, that's never going to pass. And I'm just not going to waste my time because you'll be gone and I'll still be here. And that's not going to happen. And I just thought, what in the, how is that even humanly possible? And I eventually had words with the manager about it, and
then he was gone.
He's not there. But I don't think it was meant mean spirited or I'm smarter than you. I think it was truly I'm the continual loop.
Yeah.
And it is, and that is the problem, right? Bureaucracy is the never ending continual loop of government, and you and I, politicians, we come and go. That is the nature of the beast. And while I'm a big supporter of term limits, I also fully grasp that until you disconnect bureaucracy and the people who are there forever and never,
right.
And that sometimes just because you've been there 8 years doesn't mean you need to be promoted. It just means you've been there 8 years.
I agree with that. There's some people that's been there more than a decade, and I'm just like, how are they getting elected? I'm sure people look at me the same way.
All of us, trust me. But just if we could solve the problem of bureaucracy, we'd solve half of our problems. Because you and I constantly fight that. I called a good friend of mine, Tom Young, knew him in law school, serves in the Senate for Macon with me, and I called him one time. I said, how do you deal with DOT? I said, how do you make them do things? He said, I don't know. If you figure it out, let me know. Right, and he'd been there like 8 years.
Yeah.
It is a huge, slow-moving, terrible-ish. I mean, they do great things, but they also just don't do anything sometimes. And it drives you crazy. Absolutely. And would I love to reform it all? Yes. Could I do it by myself? No, because my idea of reform and somebody else's idea of reform are going to look totally different.
Right.
And we're really going to get us something in between. And that is hard to explain to the public, that I'm constantly pushing and I'm biting at the apple and I'm trying to get more and more, but I'm okay. I have to be okay with getting 60, 70% sometimes, and then I'll work on the next 30 over the next year.
Now, I learned that on county council, and I believe it's very important to start off on your local government because, I mean, as you said earlier, everyone was kind of worried about me whenever I got elected on county council, thinking I'm going to be this bull in a china shop. But what I learned is I know with me being a little bit more libertarian, my views can be on the extreme side. Like, I don't believe in zoning. I believe the country was built without zoning, and we did just fine and let capitalism decide what's going where. But, yeah, I mean, you're always going to have those people that didn't want a factory being built right beside of their house or in the middle of a neighborhood, and that's where the importance of zoning comes in. But I started taking that approach on county council whenever it popped up about the tattoo ordinance. And as I tried to approach it, it was like, okay, well, if I can just convince them to make this small change, this fear of we're going to have all of these bikers and, the rough crowd come into the area, they'll see that this is not the big bad wolf that they think. So we made one small change. I ended up passing 3 tattoo ordinances before I left county council within a 2-year period, just because as soon as I got it done, I would resubmit to try and get a little bit closer to where I could. But sometimes you have to be happy with what you're getting. And people have lost the fact that if you are moving, in my opinion, if we're setting on a scale left or right, I feel like if we're marching 5 yards at a time on the right, that's a win. And I feel like essentially that's what the left has done since the early 80s, is they have marched 5 yards at a time while we're trying to go for a touchdown every single time, and that's the reason we have ended up so far left.
We throw Hail Marys, they run the ball up the middle, get 3 or 4 yards, and are really happy to have done it. No,
right.
And look,
we're too worried about getting bashed because we've got people within our own party bashing us for not being conservative enough whenever we have the same belief, but we want to get as conservative as possible that we can pass.
well, it's like voting against the budget because you don't like X, Y, and Z in the budget, but that budget also gave raises to teachers, made improvements for law enforcement, stopped a child who thinks they're a female from going in a female bathroom, and it
The books and public life, yeah.
It does all of these great things, and yet you get bashed because they're like, well, you voted for that budget. And you're like,
Yeah. Because one children's museum down in Charleston is promoting some book with gay parents. Everyone thinks, oh, that's what you were voting for. And it's like, come on now.
Well, don't worry. There's a flyer coming out for you on that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and that's just it. There's a mailer. And
Maybe not, since RJ's been arrested. Well, he hadn't been arrested. But we're going to take a break real quick. All right. So, as you said, there's going to be a flyer coming out against you. And this is one of the things that I've learned since getting elected. It's these AstroTurf organizations, the fake grassroots groups that are set up. But I'm hopeful with this latest development of the only member within the House or the Senate that runs campaigns from the floor, ending up in some possible legal trouble. As of right now, nothing but warrants have been served. But I'm hoping some of that will change instead of it being a political game on the floor just for the mailers.
No, look, and it is my sincere hope that that he's not done the types of things that he's being accused of. Because if he has, he ought to be put underneath the prison.
Right.
That's just bottom line. You deserve to be underneath the prison. You sexually exploit children in any way you should. So it's my hope that that's not true. In the same vein, though, you're absolutely right. We have allowed X amount of people just to hold us hostage, and especially in the House. Y'all have a very different setup than we do. In the Senate, that would not be tolerated. There are.
Y'all don't have a freedom caucus in the Senate.
Well, we have a Republican caucus in the Senate,
Right.
and we believe in freedom, and so we don't have to have a whole other caucus telling us how we don't believe in that. And that's just it. You do believe in these things. You voted. I'm sure you have a very conservative voter record. You've studied the bills. You've made the right calls. But the problem is that we want to bash each other, and we want to have highlights, and we want to be on TV, and we want to
go viral.
Yeah. And I'm like, no, I just want to go to Columbia. I want to serve, 2, 3, maybe if I get absolutely insane 4 whole terms, and then I just want to go home and be, and retire and hang out with grandkids and do that type of thing. I don't want to be famous. I don't want to be quoted every day, and I don't want to be held up as some bastion of greater thought, because
Right.
I'm there to do a job, and I think I do a pretty good job of it. Am I perfect? No. But I'll put my record up against anybody who wants to say otherwise, and I'd love for them to explain how they vote against teacher pay raises, bathroom bills, all of these things, pornography in schools, the things that they say that they're for, and then they absolutely turn around and they say, oh, but not in that bill.
Yeah.
Come on.
Well,
Take the win. Take the victory lap. Let's all celebrate that we stopped pornography in school libraries and in public libraries. That is a win. And anybody who says otherwise, they're just wrong.
Well, and the problem is the message from these AstroTurf organizations that gets back to our local parties. So, in York County, we've got our current leadership kind of listens and follows that My SCGOP playbook, it seems like, for the most part. And a perfect example is we passed the budget, a month and a half, 2 months ago. Well, no, it's about a month ago. Since then, they've had 2 speakers, David O'Neill, which I was there for that. And even though David O'Neill was part of the Freedom Caucus, I've always gotten along great with David and never thought that he was pushing something that is just false narrative.
David's not gonna lie
He's got
about
his own opinion. Yeah, but he's not going to sit there and try and just use it to bash other members. And then the second person they brought in was Rob Harris, which I think is the biggest idiot in the House. But that's just my personal opinion.
Views expressed on this show are only yours.
No, this is 100% my view because he sits there and texts Jonathan Hill while he's on the floor. And this is a guy with over 100 and something ethics violations. Like, who are we getting our information from? But just trying to combat that narrative, that's been the hardest thing while being in Columbia, because my views, and everyone thought that I'm this extreme guy. And for sure, everyone thought, okay, well, whenever he goes down there, he'll be Freedom Caucus. Well, the only reason I wasn't Freedom Caucus to start off with was primarily RJ running a negative campaign and lying about me. And he's the vice chair of the Freedom Caucus. And he's doing it all in the name of money. And then I come down there and then start getting lied to by member after member after member and seeing how they spin the narrative. And it was like, okay, this is not what I thought that it was. Idealistically, I agree with many of the things that are being pushed. But the way to go about it, if you want to take the floor and just talk to hear yourself talk, then instead of going through the process, then you'll never get anything done. You might become popular on social media, but you've got to learn the process. And I learned a lot of that with Gavin's Law because I was so infuriated. Everyone kept congratulating me on how fast it passed. I was mad because it wasn't moving fast enough. To me, it's a very simple task, but the bill just wasn't getting heard. And it wasn't until, I would ask and try to be polite to leadership, say, hey, what's wrong? Oh, no, you're good, you're good. And it wasn't until I went up to, it was actually Todd Rutherford, because I'd gotten into it with him week one over fentanyl trafficking. And I went up to him and I literally said, you're the only one with the balls to tell me what's wrong with my bill. Can you help me? And he's absolutely. And he sat down, he told me from an attorney's perspective of if one of his clients were charged, what the problems would be. And then we got Weston and Jay, and we all sat down and kind of rewrote the entire bill, and then that's whenever it started moving. But if I just went in there thinking, okay, Todd Rutherford's the devil, I'm never going to talk to him, I would have never gotten to that point to where we got the bill moving. And getting that relationship, I think, is the biggest thing. Was that something you had to learn in the Senate, or is it just, the Senate, y'all are more like court. We're more like the stock market floor. Yeah. So we're shouting at each other constantly. Y'all are very quiet. And
there's a funeral going on daily in the Senate.
Yeah.
We're just sitting around. There used to be a song, there ain't no good guys, there ain't no bad guys, they're just you and me, and we just disagree. And I think that is kind of can sum up Republicans and Democrats. I don't vilify the other side. The other side, as long as you have an earnest conviction. I vilify people who use politics as a weapon for their own personal gain, whether it's a monetary gain, a glory gain, or something else. Those are the people that irritate me to no end.
Right.
Because I'm not there for the greater glory of Michael Johnson. You get elected, and the very first thing somebody asks you is, what you going to do next?
Yeah.
And people ask me that all the time, and I say, I'm going to run for the Senate again. I said, that's what I'm doing next, because that's the only thing I want to be.
Yeah.
If I ever, a governor could let me be a U.S. senator if one of our U.S. senators died, but that's the only way I'm ever running for another office. So what I have found, but you're absolutely right, if you don't have a relationship with the other side, Democrats, whoever it is, you're missing out, because while I can fundamentally disagree with you and you can disagree with me, there are going to be little pieces and nuggets that I can find and that I can use to advance my ideas.
Right.
Not your ideas, but my ideas. And that personal relationship might also keep you from blocking one of my bills. Because, as we said a little while ago, in the Senate, it's just one guy goes, no, and your bill literally just goes into the waste bucket of ideas. And so it's important to kind of have that and that back and forth dialogue. And our problem is in Columbia, we've divided ourselves into these camps of we're the only ones who are right. You all are always wrong. And then there's a whole bunch of people working really hard to make something happen. And I'm just tired. I walk into the Senate every day, and there's only 46 of us, 46 people representing 5.4 million people. And I look around that room, and I can count who's there because they like to be called senator. They like people who call them senator. I kind of bristle still when I'm called it often.
I do like y'all smaller brooches.
Well, we small pins as we call them, but we don't wear them. So you have the people who like to be called senator, the people who just seem to like Columbia, like going to receptions and being kissed up to in that crowd. And then there's just a group of hardworking people who literally want to do the job, and they want to go home on Thursday afternoon and not think about it again. But the problem is you think about it half a Friday, you forget a little bit about it, and then for me on Sunday night, I start thinking about it again, and I spend most of Monday getting ready to be there on Tuesday.
Right?
And so I work really hard to try to do a good job, and I am constantly pissed off at those who don't. And you walk into a committee meeting, and you're like, and they ask a question, you're like, that was in the briefing. They gave us a summary of this bill, and that's in the second.
Why didn't you read that?
Second sentence told you the answer to that question. And that just never-ending irritation.
I mean, we have the same problem in the House. I mean, I think that some people just enjoy being there. Now, one thing I really hate about the House is you essentially are there for 1 year, and then you're running a campaign for the next year. So year 2 of my freshman term, there was a lot more of the showmanship on the floor. People that didn't speak before wanted to speak just because they had an election. They wanted those clips to be able to use in the election and say, I stood up for this or I stood up for that. But yeah, I mean, I have certainly seen that. And one of the big things with the bills that we have passed, and I think it's important, and especially while we have House and Senate here, something that I never realized. Prior to coming down there, I would say the House should make it as conservative as possible, and then the Senate will show their true colors. What I have learned, or the Senate should make it conservative as possible, and then the House will show their true colors. What I have learned is that if you almost need to give both chambers a little bit to work with on a bill. So if we've got, say, 80% of what we want in a bill in the House, there's going to be that other group saying, no, give us the other 20. But we're leaving it at 80, so that way whenever it goes over to the Senate can say, we added in these things to make it better. And it shows how the government can work together. We haven't seen that I've never seen that as an issue, and I think it was Ray Felder's anti-CRT bill.
Oh, yeah.
And whenever it came to the floor, I got bashed. Heath Sessions got bashed. And I think Ray Felder was the other Republican that voted, and it's her bill, voted against being able to sue teachers. But there was this push by the Freedom Caucus and these AstroTurf organizations stating, no, we've got to be able to sue teachers. And the argument I was hearing was, if it goes over to the Senate with suing teachers, it's not going to get heard. Sure enough, that was one of the first bills early on in session, went to the Senate, and it never came out. And you've got to understand those relationships as well. Not that you can allow one to dictate the other, but if you can get the majority of your way and you've got an agreement that we're going to push to get this done on the Senate side. And I think Sessions does a excellent job of understanding where things are in the Senate and where things are in the House and what that the meshing of the two are.
Well, the first time you pass a bill and you leaves your chamber and you think, yes, I've done something. And then you look over and about a month later, your bill's just
sitting
dead in the other chamber. You start thinking, oh, hell, what do I have to go do now, right?
Yeah.
I have to walk all the way over there and start talking about it? Yeah, you do. And I think that is often missed. With Ray's bill comes over. We eventually took it up. We removed all of that language, everything, including the language that the Freedom Caucus had stuck in there, saying that anyone in America, a guy in Kansas, could sue the
Rock Hill School District.
The Rock Hill School District, because he didn't like a book in their library.
Right.
Are you kidding me? That's like a plaintiff lawyer's dream.
Right.
Open jurisdiction. I mean, I was like, that's just made absolutely no sense.
But trial lawyers are the ones that's evil.
Yeah. Give me a break. And we passed that bill back, and then it can't ever get out of conference committee because the conference committee gets stuck on, well, we want these protections. Who are we protecting?
Right.
Let's pass a bill that allows parents who are involved within their child's life to actually influence decisions inside their district and file lawsuits if they not if they don't get their way, but if they don't feel that they've been properly heard through those channels. Not allow some crackpot in North Dakota who read online, who got an email from one of these organizations that you love. I mean, I always love every Tuesday morning I open up my email and you got 500 emails, from local people based off of these other emails, and you're like, I don't even know what you're talking about. There is no health czar. All right. I mean, it's just,
you don't say.
I don't get that. And so you fight this and you fight this and it is a bizarre. But you're absolutely right. It's very difficult. I think it's probably the hardest thing to do is to learn your chamber and then go try to figure out the other chamber that you don't even work in.
I mean, I was extremely disappointed S1 didn't get passed.
Yeah.
Essentially it was held hostage because it was the number one bill coming out of the Senate, and the House was so focused on getting energy that it became who's going to draw first, and neither bill passed.
And energy does. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same.
So both of them die, but at the same time, I've got constituents that have lost children to fentanyl overdoses, and this is something that we could go after, especially with us being close to the border. A lot of the fentanyl cases involved in our district are coming out of North Carolina. If that law would have passed, then our law enforcement would go across that border and bring someone back. They're not going to go across the border just for drug dealing. But if they're going to get a homicide charge out of it, then they will.
You hate to say you don't want to know how the sausage is made, but you often don't want to know how the sausage is made.
Yeah.
This is complex stuff. We are arguing over the most minute of points, and you never know. I have found, as much as there's a Republican-Democrat divide, there is a rural versus urban divide, especially in the Senate, where all of a sudden you'll have senators who are, you think, man, that's a really conservative senator and this really liberal, Democrat senator, and they are standing a hard line. They're going to fight to the death to kill this bill, and you finally figure out, they think that's going to hurt something with ag, or they think this is going to hurt something in their rural area, or they're not going to get funding. I mean, when you think about it, certificate of need. Certificate of need didn't come down to whether or not you believed the government should be involved in hospitals. It was whether or not you lived in a county that had a hospital. Because if you lived in a county that didn't have a hospital, you took CON to mean you were never going to get a hospital.
Right.
And so those people fought the hardest to keep it out, because under the hope that, the government will make somebody build a hospital here eventually, which was, by the way, never going to happen. But certificate of need is actually a really positive thing. But that's kind of just the weird dynamics inside the room. And Charleston guys stick together, Republican or Democrat.
So I was going to say,
stick together,
a low country Republican is far different than an upstate Republican and a Piedmont Republican. I would say the upstate has become the Freedom Caucus area. The Piedmont is close to the Freedom Caucus, but not quite all the way there. And then as you start getting low country, you might have a low country Republican that we would view moderate all day long, but those areas were blue and they're newly elected down there. If they go too far right, they're out of office and it's just going to become a Democrat seat. And I would rather have a moderate Republican than a Democrat in that seat, because at least I can have the conversation a lot of times, especially within caucus or anything else, to help move some of the more conservative agendas forward.
I have had so many conversations with Republicans in this area where I will say a Republican in Anderson is different than a Republican in Charleston, different than one in Georgetown, different than one here. We are very different. We face different things. You and I are constantly having issues with North Carolina and border issues in kind of a very fast-growing area. Anderson County, very conservative, very different outlook on things. Charleston is literally turning blue as we speak.
Right.
Since we began this podcast till now, it got bluer. I mean, and so every day as we're changing and we're not arguing, but we're talking, the Republicans up here sometimes think everybody's just like them, and I'm like, no, and certainly the ones in Anderson think everybody should be like them.
Right.
And so I think that what we have to do is, look, you play the cards you're dealt, and I'm with you. I want more Republicans in the Senate, because the more Republicans in the Senate, the more likely we are to control every committee and be able to pass good, meaningful legislation. And am I going to get that done the way I want it every time? No. But last time,
sitting there bashing a Republican whenever your bill comes up, they're never going to hear it. No. And everyone's like, oh, well, that's just wrong. Well, I mean, that's life. You don't go to your in-laws' house and talk shit about the way they're cooking and then complain about how you're getting treated. Like,
you eat that corn casserole no matter what. Yeah.
Right. I mean, and I don't know. It just seems people have just lost the whole being able to think straight. All right. So, speaking of bills, you've been there 4 years. I get a lot of credit of people saying, oh, you've been so successful. And really, I've had Gavin's Law and, I wouldn't say insignificant, but Gavin's Law was the one law. You showed me a list of things that you've gotten accomplished.
Well,
and I want you to talk on them.
I was listening to one of y'all's podcasts, and I heard Heath say how much he hates talking about himself and what he's done. Yeah. And I'm the exact same way. I'm like, okay, yeah, all right. But so I knew I was coming on, so I actually looked it up, because I have no idea. I don't keep a log somewhere, so I had to pull it up. And I realized I was the primary sponsor on 6 bills that became law in the past 4 years. And I didn't do any in my first year, because as Harvey Peeler told me, he goes, freshmen are best seen and not heard. And so I kind of took him literally, and I just sat in my seat and literally just tried to figure out what they were talking about half the time. But no, I passed, I guess the first bill I passed, and it sounds crazy, I passed a sunscreen bill. So I do, I try to do monthly breakfasts. I've really fallen off the wagon, just mainly because I now get 55, 60 people show up to a breakfast, and the restaurants do not appreciate that at all. But I had a constituent tell me, she said, it's against the law in South Carolina for your child to put sunscreen on at school. And I said, what are you talking about? That's just that, you have to be kidding. And she said, no, it's against the law. So I actually passed a law that says you can. And I'm talking about a bill that was going nowhere, right? Just a bill. You pass it, and the chairman of education looked at it, and he was like, oh, that's sweet, thank you. And he kind of patted my head and was like, you go away. And out of nowhere, the South Carolina Dermatological Association, a group of doctors, start sending hundreds of emails to the State House. Next thing I know, chairman's like, Senator Johnson's bill is going to go straight to the and this bill, boom, passes, and nobody looks at it. And literally, it got signed into law. And then the Post and Courier wrote it was one of the top 8 pieces of legislation that year. And I was like, I don't think we were looking at the same legislation.
We're looking for a primary sponsor in the Senate for the pinball to make pinball legal in South Carolina.
I mean, I got very lucky. I've done a law enforcement protection bill that says that if you're in law enforcement, you do not have to have your name discoverable online through government databases to try put your name with an address.
Right.
That to me is very important. We passed it, and then we've had to delay it 2 years in a row now, because we have, you name it, special interest group has all of a sudden come in and saying, we got to tweak this, got to tweak that. I'm working really hard.
They're probably saying it's silence and freedom of speech.
Well, it's more real estate title searches, and I'm like, there's a way around this. 9 other states have this. California does this. South Carolina can do this. Weston Newton and I are working on getting that one fixed, but we're going to get that done. I passed the apprenticeship tax bill. An obscure real estate practice bill. There was a company that was going around, especially in the low country. They would knock on houses, every house on a block, typically poor areas. They'd give you $500 on the spot, and you would sign a agreement saying that if you ever chose to sell your house, they got to list your house. And that $500 would turn into $50,000 because they recorded these at the courthouse, that they were entitled to get off the top of the sale of your house. Those are unethical, they're illegal. This company
I remember reading about that.
Yeah, they're being sued all over the country. I filed a bill just to make it easier to get rid of them. We were able to get that passed. I was one of Wes Clymer, Greg Hembry, and myself sat together one afternoon and wrote the JMSC reform bill 1046, which became law. Not everything we wanted in it, but a whole bunch of what we wanted in it. I'm a big believer. The one thing we didn't get that I really believe in is I don't believe legislators. I don't use the term lawyer legislators. I don't think legislators should serve on the JMSC. And so I continue to believe that.
That's part of the Constitution, though, isn't it?
The creation of the JMSC is, but not us sitting on it. We could let anybody else sit on it. We don't. We act like the problem with letting me serve on the JMSC and then vote on you is I get to pick who I get to vote on later.
Yeah.
If I'm voting on the winner or loser, I shouldn't be voting on who gets to be on the ballot.
That could make sense.
So that's me.
I would love to see us eliminate the holdover status of magistrates. And I know that's the tough one for the Senate because that's one of those power
I'd love not to appoint magistrates because I don't think senators should appoint.
But that's where the Senate holds power because the House has the power in so many other ways. Whenever a vote is a vote,
we don't like to share power. You know.
Yeah.
This. I mean, it's the system. The system is built. Look, that's why the governor's so weak.
Yeah.
And it's not that McMaster's weak or Haley was weak. It's that we created a governor in 1870 to be weak because we were scared a black man would become governor, a former slave would become governor. Literally, the only reason our Constitution is the way it is.
That Robert Smalls?
Yeah. I
mean, the first Republican in South Carolina.
Make no doubt. I mean, so we created an entire Constitution to keep the executive branch under the thumb of the legislative branch because we always assumed that freed slaves would not be able to take over the legislature completely. But they could have potentially taken over the governorship. And yet, 120 years later, 140 years later, we continue to just serve under this horrific Constitution.
We just say it is because it is.
That is right. And then I passed another one of these little bills where I literally had a constituent call me one day, and he said, did you know that in the state of Alabama, if you renew your license as a engineer, you can voluntarily donate money to a university that has an engineering program, and the money goes there. And I said, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. He said, well, look that up. And so I did some research, and Alabama has it, and Florida has it. And at Auburn University, where I went, they're putting about $850,000 a year in just donations, basically, through this when you renew your license. The state of Florida, it's about $1.2 million.
Wow.
And so I passed it. It's Clemson, South Carolina State, the Citadel, I think the University of South Carolina are the four that can benefit just because it's a very specific degree program. And we're now putting around $250,000-300,000 back into and the money has to be spent in that program. It just doesn't go back to the college. It goes into the program to endow I
love that idea.
Professor for scholarships. And to me, it was just something easy to do.
I'd love to do that for tech jobs to make us the top state for these tech jobs to come to.
And not only, I will say this, and you're good. I'm going to really veer off thing for a second. Tax policy should reflect what you want to be. Our tax policy reflects that we want retired people to move to South Carolina because we encourage it. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't that we shouldn't
it's
give
that
tax
way
breaks
because
to them.
Retirees are the ones donating to the campaigns.
Well, make no doubt about that.
That's the problem.
So, but if we want to have tech jobs, if we want to bring higher level engineering jobs in South Carolina, we have to create a tax system that encourages those jobs to move here. And it's almost like we don't realize that. We do things and we're like, oh my God, I cannot believe more retirees showed up. Well, yeah.
That's the economic development things like we tried to pass and then we get blamed as being these crony capitalists and everything. And if it wasn't for Act 388, we wouldn't have the need to do so much of this, which Act 388 was created well before us. But I do believe that it is one of the biggest crutches on the state of South Carolina. And we've got to reform that. I'm not the guy that would, be willing to lead that charge. I got my own issues, but it is something that I do believe needs to be done.
Well, isn't that kind of the weird thing? So I got into the Senate and someone said to me, they said, pick one or two things that you're really interested in and try not to do a whole bunch of other things.
Right.
So most of the bills that I produce, at a certain level are economic development. They look like they're going this way, but they're really about economic development. I'm about creating more civil engineering jobs. Therefore, that's economic development.
Right.
Apprentice taxship is economic development. And so I'm a huge believer in that. And so most of my bills are more geared around that because you don't have the bandwidth to do it all, right? You can't be an expert in finance and judiciary and labor commerce, right? You can't. That's why in the House, y'all just serve on one committee, and we serve on 4 or 5 in the Senate. And you'll find that even on the 4 or 5, there are some that you're kind of quiet. You're there, but you're listening and you're trying to give it. But you're like, man, I don't know a whole lot about this.
You still can't keep up with it.
I can't.
The one thing I don't want to be on is education.
Oh, see, I'm going on education. If I can, I'm going on education.
There's so much that can be done, but I feel like I'm starting so far behind everyone else that I'm not the effective person to be on education. So I'm glad to hear that you're looking at education for York County, because since Ray Felder left, education and healthcare are two things that mental health as well. But I feel like those are things that are really hurting amongst our delegation.
Well, and we probably need. It'd be nice if somebody sat on either finance or Ways and Means on the delegate. And people don't realize that having someone sit on one of those committees helps your county. Your county there's a direct correlation between economic impact, money coming back home versus not. Now, certainly we are helped in that.
But it doesn't help if everyone's going to vote against the budget.
Well, Chairman Peeler represents parts of York County, so we kind of have one of the main people on our side already. But no, I certainly Senator Clymer and I have talked about that, and finance versus judiciary, and how we want to be diversified and not do everything, because we want to be able to protect our area, and the best way to do that is be able to each of us have an expertise, and we're not totally stepping over each other's toes all the time.
I agree, and that's one of the things I learned coming down there was how our delegation, and I think it works really well together, but it was also trying to figure out, where do I fit in? It goes back to whenever the speaker asked me, like, what committees do you want to be on? And judiciary was an easy choice year one because I'm trying to get Gavin's Law. And I was honored to get on judiciary as a freshman to be able to sit through that. But yes, a lot of shutting up and just listening. Especially being a non-attorney. But at the same time, if our AI cyber committee ends up being a standing committee and it gets put under LCI, I would rather go to LCI. The tech industry and the AI, quantum computing, I think is the future. And my biggest problem in the state of South Carolina is we are not nimble enough to keep up with it. We've got to whenever it comes to tech policy, we've got to be able to pass, realize an issue, and make the change quickly if we are to keep up.
Well, that's hard for government, period, right?
But we're just constantly falling behind other states. We're watching other states, and whenever we try to produce the bills, now granted, we're dealing with a different federal court system, and there's so much money coming out of the lobby to try and shut all these things down in the names of they're saying you're violating privacy, even whenever you're talking to kids. I just believe that we have to prepare for that. And through our AI and Cyber Committee, whenever I asked, the number one thing that we need prior to being able to move that way is energy. We're not going to bring the companies here if we don't have the energy first.
And y'all run energy through LCI, right?
I think it's LCI.
Labor Commerce Industry.
And the 3 veterans that we lost were LCI.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So LCI's got a lot of. So you passed Gavin's Law, which I know for you felt like that was slow. But I have to be honest, that was
extremely fast.
Lightning speed. I mean, I'd only been there 2 years at that point, but I was like,
I could have blown it up. I could have blown it up. I don't know how many times if it wasn't for Heath and Brandon Cox and Lawson being like, "Hey, calm down, young Patty Watt. Let's handle it this way."
You need somebody to kind of help guide you through, because until you've done it, until you've walked a bill through your own chamber, over to the next chamber, and then to the governor, you don't really know how to do it.
We essentially went 4 months to get it out of the House, and by the end of the 5th month, it was law.
There you go.
So that was shocking.
So you're sitting on this cyber committee. We don't have any type of cyber committee in the Senate. So what exactly are y'all? I mean, what are y'all studying? What are y'all what's the goal At the end of the day,
is to be prepared for artificial intelligence, but we're also finding a lot of like this ransomware affecting small businesses. We're learning about all the issues. What I think we should do with the Cyber AI Committee is it be a standing subcommittee of Judiciary or LCI. So anything to do with tech would be the bill that's getting reviewed there. Right now, this first year, it's been nothing but listening and learning. You know, and a lot of times with this being my passion, of course, I feel like I'm a little bit further along than most. So I show up just so I can ask some questions to try and help other people understand a little bit better, but I also feel like I'm wasting a lot of time whenever we could be introducing these bills.
Yeah, but I you know, you say that, but I will say this: if y'all don't study it, you don't.
But we're not studying one thing. That's the problem. I mean, it's all over the board.
At some point, you got to come up, and and that's the part. You can study something to death, right? So at some point,
if you just put engineering,
put
engineering as a committee, well, you got structural, you got environmental, and that's where we're at. There's too many different avenues, and it's going all across the board. Everything from the child sexual abuse material to AI deepfake intelligence to AI within the healthcare industry and how beneficial it is, to data breaches, to ransomware. I mean, it's just all over the board, which makes it extremely difficult.
I have a good friend who works in for one of the larger companies in AI, and he is constantly saying to me, y'all ought to start thinking about regulating this. You ought to start, and he is a strong conservative, and he's like, y'all ought to start thinking about doing something, because we're not going. The companies aren't going to regulate. They're just gonna, they're just going to let it run amok until somebody tells them to stop.
Mark Zuckerberg has shown that he is anything but. He's going to push that button, and he's going to take it further, and he will not stop until it is forced upon him.
So we're not going to be on Reels this afternoon, what you're saying this
morning. No. But he is just, the way that he approached things is that anarchist attitude, which I'm not saying I disagree with, until it starts affecting children.
He'd rather pay the fine.
Yes, instead of fixing
the money.
Yeah. I mean, he wants the advertising dollars on every kid's head instead of protecting the children from being exposed to many of these things. So, and he's not the only bad guy in the room, but I'm just using that as one example because he's the one who's doing most of the funding. He's the one with the deep pockets that is funding this net choice lobby that is making people like Rand Paul shut down the Kids Online Safety Act, which only affects kids on a federal level, which he didn't shut it down, but he was trying to fight against it. We'll come find out Rand Paul hires his chief of staff is the former head lobbyist for net choice. Like, this is all about money. And now it's going to go to, on the congressional side, Mike Johnson has said there's no appetite to hear COSA, is what I've been told. I can understand that, whereas prior to being in politics, I couldn't understand it. But now Mike Johnson on the federal level, not Senator Michael Johnson that we're talking to.
Although I do get all of his emails. Yeah. Can't tell you how many emails I received congratulating me on becoming Speaker of the House. I was like, well, thank you. And I actually I wrote some of them back and then I finally gave up.
My next campaign, if I was you, I'd be running under Mike Johnson, not Michael Johnson.
Depends on how popular he is.
With him being a freshman leader, he is responsible for getting the Republicans reelected. And that's how our leaders are chosen, is can they increase the numbers? Can they increase the power that they would have within their party? And he knows that if Meta and Net Choice is going to put $1 billion against every one of his candidates, then this isn't the time to hear it his freshman year. He's got to gain a little bit. But what sucks about it is it's got to start all over again and go back to the Senate. Now, granted, Chuck Schumer on the Democrat side might have realized that and waited to push it just for that reason, to try and call your bluff. But that's the inside baseball that I'm kind of learning, and people get mad whenever I say I kind of understand Mike Johnson's point in that. But I just wish there was more honesty and transparency about it. Like, I can't do it because we're going to have all this money come after us, and then we're going to lose a bunch of seats, and then we'll get nothing accomplished.
Oh, well, look, I mean, think about take that to Columbia. Pick a bill, any bill of any substance, energy bill, right? Energy bill moves over, and all of a sudden, Dominion and Duke and every major energy supplier in South Carolina has an expert, and they're spending money, and they're trying to give you opinions, and right or wrong, they're pushing their agenda. And the goal of the majority leader in the Senate is to get Republicans reelected and to keep a majority of Republicans in the Senate. His job is not to pass X, Y, and Z legislation. Literally, the majority leader's job is to do that. It is the job of the president of the Senate to pass X, Y, and Z. And they're totally different jobs. And I think sometimes we forget that. We want to keep our majorities. We want to do all that. And we allow that to dictate what we're willing to do. And
it's kill one to save 100, so to say.
I prefer us, let's do the right thing, and send me home if you don't agree with it.
I can agree with that.
I'm okay with going home. The worst thing would happen is I'd eat dinner with my wife every night, literally.
But then again, that's are we chunking a Hail Mary? Yeah, I think that the fear and the reason that people are against that, I guess the people, is we don't have trust and faith in our elected officials to not be that swampy individual that's just using that all the time.
Oh, how many emails you get? Oh, you're on the take, you're making money. And I'm like, man, I wish y'all would show me where all that money is, because I've never seen a dime of it.
I mean, that's one of the big things is, people trying to say that CILFAB paid off all these people, and it's like, show it to me. I get tired of just rumors getting started and people speak it as if it's the truth, and that's what I see a lot from these AstroTurf organizations, But we're going to go ahead.
Funding source.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and those AstroTurf organizations are getting funded by, well, in the case within the House of the ones that I found, through the Freedom Caucus or the Freedom Group out of D.C. or out of Texas. That's where the money's coming from. Starts these organizations, and then they just become the echo chamber to push out whatever agenda that they want. And it's very disheartening. But we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Once again, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
With us. OMB Mechtoberfest. What did you think?
I'm a huge Marzen fan. I mean, like, this is the best time of year for me. So, no, I'm all in. Love OMB. Appreciate Comer for distributing it.
Yes.
Bringing it down to South Carolina.
Thank you once again to our sponsors, Comer Distributing and 742 North. We're in the podcast studio once again. And thank you to all of our listeners. We have a very special trip coming up this week. We are going to be traveling down to the Capitol, and I believe we are going to have the Attorney General jumping on this podcast. So this will be our second traveling experience. I wanted to get up to Chapel Hill. They had the Life Conference.
Speaking of liberal places.
Yeah. But we had, whenever we went to a Christian conservative legislative conference last year, we met these representatives from Maine. So one of our friends, Reagan Paul, was down there. And she come down to that event, and I wanted to get up there and actually do the podcast with her, but it's just impossible. And Heath is the planner. I'm the guy, my entire life's philosophies don't anticipate, participate. I'll just show up and kind of wing it. But thank you once again, Senator Johnson, and thank you to our listeners, and y'all have a great day.
Anything you want or who you want to be,